The Hangout on air is live.
All right.
So I'm Stephen Downs, live webcasting from Castleman, Ontario, Canada, for the e-learning 3.0 course. It is November 14th, 2018, 3:02 p.m. in the afternoon. We've already got 2 viewers. Yay! Might be us. With me is Maha Bali. I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope.
Close.
Okay, tell me how it's pronounced then, please.
It's just an open A sound, Maha Bali. Just say it very quickly. It won't.
Maha Bali.
Yeah. Much better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. No, it wasn't really much better.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
I do worry because I like to get pronunciations properly, even pronunciation properly. So I'm stickler about that.
I just appreciate that you asked. I do. I mean, I appreciate that you asked. I know it's not like something. It's.
Yeah. I asked and then I completely failed it. But Maha Bali.
No, that was very good. Really.
Okay, good. See, I'm Canadian, right? So I want to say right? So
I know. I was in a British school all my life, so in school my name was Maha Bali, and all of our names didn't sound like our names, and so I was so used to hearing it that way until my daughter thought I had an English name and an Arabic name.
That makes sense.
And then I was like, actually, no, it's the same name. So, and that's when I started to ask people to say it properly. Because in a way, a name is part of your identity.
Yeah.
We're talking about identity, right?
We are.
I'll let you start us off.
I once had a fight with a French teacher many years ago. A knockdown, drag him out fight. Like I had so many, not physical, but an argument. Because having a physical fight with my French teacher would have been very bad. But she insisted that my name was Etienne and not Stephen.
Oh.
And I wasn't having any of it. So, yeah, we took up almost the entire class arguing that. I finally won when I pointed out that we don't call our prime minister Peter Waterhole instead of Pierre Trudeau. That kind of dates me in Canada. So, okay. Trying to pronounce the name right again. Maha.
Don't worry about it. But I thought the French for Stephen was Stéphane. I didn't know Etienne was a.
Yeah, it's that's neat. You're typing and it's showing up on the screen. I love that. There's so much of this facility I don't use. Anyhow, no, Stéphane is something different.
Oh.
Yeah, and there are many French people named Stéphane, but it's a different name from Stephen. At least I think so. but maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Identity. So, yeah. As per usual, I don't have anything planned. So for the 8 viewers we have now, welcome 8 viewers. This will be a typically confused session, but I have a bunch of things. There's a bunch of places I want to go with this. I guess we should say, first of all, because in our 3-minute planning session before this talk, we agreed that we'd say that we don't really know each other, which is true, isn't it? So I learned quite a bit just by reading your introduction to this session, and I found it interesting, and I'm just going to see if I can't pop that up.
Okay. I could briefly say a couple of things about it, or you could comment on something about it.
Why don't you say a couple of things about it? That would be awesome.
So part of the reason I started writing about it is just to get myself ready for today, but also I was triggered by what Stephen used as my bio on e-learning 3.0. And so he was talking about how, my institutional affiliation and my blogging and my tweeting but he didn't include virtually connecting in it. And I felt like virtually connecting is part of my identity. Oh, hi, hey, you have Equity Unbound open as well. Okay. and then I also read a little bit on the website, and I saw that there was this identity graph. And, you know, I could have spent some time figuring out what Stephen meant by identity graph, and I think I want to ask you about that. But I thought, you know, one of the things that struck to me is like how you know, what elements of yourself you want to identify other than saying me or myself. And that these could be different for different people, and we can choose what to hide and what to not hide, if I understand correctly. And it made me remember the Alt-CV activity, which we used in Equity Unbound this semester, but I've used it before, and it came up with Sarah Honeychurch and Kevin Hodgson, who I think are participating in eLearning 3.0. We developed that for Digital Writing Month. So I posted my Alt-CV from this semester. And thinking about that is that I would post something different every year, because it's not the same things that I want to highlight about myself at different times. So thinking about identity and online identity, like identity in general, is something that evolves and is dynamic and is contextual, like what dimension of yourself you want to show people at different times and who to show it to. But also digital identity, you can have different digital identities. So that people finding me on Twitter would see something different than people finding me on Facebook. And Stephen, I don't know about you, because you've been, you know, you're the connectivism person, right? How do your different digital identities manifest? And what did you mean by the identity graph? Because maybe you meant something completely different than what I thought.
So just for the viewers, here is the thing that you created, which I found was pretty interesting. We're going to come back and talk about that because I have questions. And just for the record, where I got your identity, and I find that this is an interesting thing to me, was from your page, your About Me. And you see, I'm the world's laziest person, so I did this and copied and pasted. So you were the author of your own bio, indirectly. But of course, it was interesting, and it raised some questions with me as well about you know, the expectation that I would consult you and have you choose your approved bio as the introduction for this course. And you know, I certainly see that. Okay, stopping screen sharing. There we go. I'm back.
But I also said on my blog that I do what you've done as well. I do that sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
I don't always ask people.
Yeah. Now, how do I turn that? Never mind. I'm thinking aloud about how to make the images show up properly, because it was going back and forth between you and me on the screen automatically, and then I highlighted to show the graph, and then I stopped doing that. I don't know.
It goes back and forth automatically if you're not clicking on either of us. But if you click again, it'll undo that. It toggles.
Oh, there we go. So simple and yet so opaque.
It happens. It happens on virtually connecting. Sometimes an entire virtually connecting session is focused on one person by mistake because the person handling it did that. Happens. So
here's what I was getting at with graph, and let's test this out with you. It's come up with a couple of the students who've asked this as well. Students, participants,
learners.
I'm not even sure I like using the term learners, because it implies that they will learn something, and I'm not really ready to make that claim. Well, you know, but I like participants. Also, you know, learners is a specific role, and you know, I like to think of the participants of the course as the same as the instructor of the course.
I like that.
You know, and then I have had cases in the past, like the second time we ran connectivism and connective knowledge, where the participants basically took over the teaching of the course, and I began to complain because it was too hard to keep up.
Sounds like that was a good course then.
It was a great course. It was actually in many ways better than the first one, because it was the people from the first one that came back for the second one and took it over.
Right.
I loved it. So I gave an activity in this course, you probably saw it, to create a graph, but in this graph don't have a node that is me or myself or my name or whatever, right? So now by a graph, what I mean is a network, right? A bunch of interconnected but separate things. And so it's a lot like the rhizomatic thing. So you have separate entities and links between those entities. So your identity would be these separate things, and then the links between them. And the difference between the graph with the central node that says me and the graph without that node is the graph without that node is me, but the graph with that node is about me. That's what I was trying to capture with that. So let me just toss that out and see what you think of that, first of all.
As you were saying it started to make sense, and then I started to think about when the idea of putting me in the center makes me think about connections to other entities outside myself. And so the connections outside would not include, would instead of mom, it would include my daughter, and that would be me and a connection to my daughter. And that's a very different thing than calling myself a mom. And so again, it would be a connection to my affiliation to my institution, or to virtually connecting, or to hybrid pedagogy, but not my role in those spaces, and not why I'm in those spaces. But if I remove me, then I'm focusing more on those different things. That's what I was thinking. I'm not sure if that's what you meant.
No, that's fine, because so let's say you did that. Maybe that means you need to create the graph differently, because now the graph sort of becomes about something different. What
does yours look like? Do you have one?
I haven't drawn mine yet.
Because I think I like to do one so that my student. Well, I worry. So we're not talking students; we're talking participants here, right? But when I was doing my master's, and we were doing, this was back in 2003, dial-up and all that. And I would talk with my tutor about saying that, we're all learning together, and that kind of egalitarian environment. And I would say, well, if it's an egalitarian environment, then you need to participate too as the tutor, not to stand back, because by standing back, you're differentiating yourself from everyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
But of course, if you just assigned the idea of the identity graph 2 days ago, some people are just still working on theirs.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Like the other, like you. Yeah, exactly. But the worry of it is, of course, if you show it too early, people think they have to do something exactly the same, and you don't want that, I guess, as well.
Oh, definitely.
So that's a difficult balance when you're the only facilitator. When there are more facilitators, then if you get 3 different versions, then you sort of get at least the idea that they don't all have to look the same.
Yeah.
But if it's just you and people are looking at what you're going to do. But I mean, I'm seeing who's participating in the course. They're pretty independent educators who probably come up with their own cool things.
They have so far. They created just generic graphs last week, and I was really impressed by the diversity and the breadth of them. I liked them a lot. So I'm expecting similar things. We've already seen a few. I want to go back to yours. So I'm going to go back to...
Yeah. With the caveat that this was created earlier this semester, not for this course.
No, that's fine.
It has no arrows in it.
And it doesn't have arrows.
Straight line.
But,
maybe it's a sign of something.
Okay, I think that's the right one. So this is, this is your about me. Here we go. This is yours.
The blog, yeah.
So I really liked how colorful it was and all of that. Even though it wasn't strictly speaking a graph, but it's okay. I can imagine the circles and the lines, and they're there really, even if they're implicit. But what I found interesting, and I don't think one you did today would change a whole lot. Are you able to see my cursor maybe.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can see the
So,
cursor.
awesome. So you've got here voted for inclusion in Uncommon Woman Coloring Book, and here awarded the first Whale Prize. I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Co-founder of Virtually Connecting, etc. And we're going to come back to some of that. But what struck me is these are external things, right? We'll go back to the prize, for example. They might not have chosen you.
Right.
That's certainly
Right.
within the realm of possibilities. And in fact, it's
Right.
the fact that this is so possible that makes it worthwhile. And I contrast that with the idea that we define our own identity. And if we define our own identity, which is kind of what you were suggesting earlier, then why would we define it this way, as defined externally?
Right.
But
that's a good point.
What do you think about that?
So, okay, so let's look at the other ones, though, because co-founding Virtually Connecting is something that I created.
Yeah.
So it's not, though, to be fair, I co-created it, and it does require a lot of other people responding to me, and I talk about that in the blog post.
Yes.
So even though I co-founded it, it could have been a total mess if nobody liked me, basically.
Yeah. I've had projects like that.
Sorry?
I've had projects like that.
But the finishing the PhD while caring for my toddler, I guess finishing the PhD requires someone external awarding me. And I was talking about these different lenses of identity, right? That James Paul Gee came up with. So some of them are like that. Some of them are institutional. But for me, finishing the PhD while caring for a toddler is an achievement that I did. Although, yeah, finishing the PhD requires someone else to agree to let me finish it, right? And the blogging is, I guess, me, but still, if you have no audience, it's not very, like, you can keep writing for yourself, but why do it on a blog if people are not going to respond to you? So you're just making me realize now that a lot of the things that seem to be personal about I think of myself as a writer, but a lot of that comes from external validation of my writing. If I kept writing and nobody appreciated it, I wouldn't think of myself as a writer, even if I kept writing, which I had been before I was blogging. So thinking about that. So that's really interesting. But what about the ones, and there's also that tweet from Rajiv, with the caveat that this was an alt CV, and CVs usually do have those external validation things versus an identity graph. I'm trying to think of what I would put in an identity graph. What about the colorful swirl thingy, the word cloud?
Yeah, that was getting a bit closer to what I was thinking of. I've taken down the image, unfortunately, but I can put it back up really quickly because I'm fast now. There we go. Yeah, so you've got your role as a blogger, as a mooker, writer, mother, warrior, it's in yellow, teacher, educator, tweeter, researcher, ed techie. So,
and in the background, lots of lifelong learner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those. Well, my eyes are old and bad, so the text is too small to read.
It's not very accessible. It's not a very accessible image. I just realized now. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I need to do something about that.
Yeah, it'd be hard to make this accessible, really. I mean, like, what would the alt description? The alt description would be bigger than the image.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah. So the thing is, are these things that you are, or are these things that you do, or is it the same thing? If I ask that, what do you think?
That's a really good point, because I think about writing, for example, and teaching. Right, writing and teaching are things that are both. It's something that you do, and then whether or not it becomes integral to your identity varies over time, I guess. I think if you do it long enough and you like it and you're passionate about it enough, and I guess you do get some external validation for it. Like, if you think you're a good teacher and you love teaching, but your students keep giving you horrible evaluations and they don't seem to enjoy your class and they want to attend it, then I don't think that's not very conducive to you, keeping on making this your identity. And so for example, that would mean if someone had teaching as part of their identity, even if they weren't employed as a teacher, the way they would behave would be in that kind of way. They would be like that with their children, or they would be like that. So I have a friend of mine who is in a situation where she can't teach, but she's been creating her own local, like almost parallel textbooks to the government textbooks in Sudan for her family, you know. So it's just an instinctive thing that she feels like she sees a bad curriculum. She wants people to learn better, so she does something about it.
Yeah.
And she's not in a formal situation where she can call herself a teacher. So I was thinking of that kind of thing. And the same kind of thing with writing, I guess. It is something you do. And a lot of people do it, but it's not part of their identity. If they had to stop writing, they'd be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think about writing as something that if I stopped doing it, I would not be fine. Mom is something that you do, and you can have the identity but not do it, right?
Yeah.
Someone can be a mom but not live a life of a mom. So you have a child, but you don't necessarily mother her. So
once you've started doing it, you can't really stop doing it.
Yeah. But I'm thinking about something like virtually connecting. So if I co-founded Virtually Connecting, and that's part of my identity, like when it's not there, I feel like there's something wrong that you didn't mention it. You know, like how could that not be? And you know, the thing is in context, because in my F2F, nobody cares much. What the heck are you doing with this Virtually Connecting? Is that the place where you get those crazy ideas and then you come and tell us this is what people are doing all over the world? You know, it's like to them, it's nothing. But in an open, connected course, that's kind of one of the things I would expect. But the thing is, if I do less and less sessions in Virtually Connecting, if I'm less involved, to me that doesn't reduce that part of my identity, because I still was the co-founder and it was still part of, So it's kind of like, you know, if you don't write any other papers about connectivism, it doesn't take away from the fact that you did that and you were in the beginning of that.
Mm-hmm.
And is it something that you do or something that you are? What do you think? I think both. Not everything has to be both, but some of the key things are both.
Yeah, well, I mean, my thinking is that trying to narrow it down to it's either this or it's that probably is unproductive. It's probably elements of both. You know, each thing is a thing in itself. I know I sound Kantian there. I don't mean to, but that's essentially true, right? Being the person involved with connectivism is a different thing from being a person who rides a bicycle. And I do riding a bicycle is part of my identity, at least of my own self-identity. Although other cyclists look at me riding a bicycle and they laugh. That's not my bicycle. So I think each one, and that's part of the reason why I like to break them apart and distribute them, because if they're all together, you know, in one circle or as aspects of one entity, then in some way they all need to be the same, and that doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is, and this doesn't really come out clearly in your diagram, although I think it should, and I think you would do this, is the linkages between one thing and another. Like being a mother certainly must carry over to, you know, for example, your PhD studies. It certainly carries over, I think, to your blogging. And it's probably linked in a relevant way to your achievements, like the prize or the voting. Do you think that's true?
Not the prize, because that was when I graduated college.
Okay.
But it connects to Virtually Connecting. The whole reason Virtually Connecting exists is because I have a child and I can't travel a lot.
Right.
I used to travel before she was born all the time. So
that's you know, just as an aside, I have found, and maybe this is less true now, but and you know, you talk, a lot of the stuff you talk about is equity and inclusion and things, and I'm not blah blah blahing them. I want to reference them, but part of the identity of a scholar is in this day and age, at least for the Western world, is travel. It's you know, you are someone who travels around the world and meets people and things like that, and then when that's cut off, that can have an impact.
Yeah.
I'd like you, if you could, and it wasn't really part of the plan because honestly, I didn't know about this part of you, even though it was lower down in your biography. I didn't know about virtually connecting. So why not, if I could have you talk about that, tell me about that, because
Sure.
I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, and then maybe some people watching also don't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to know what it is or how it started, and then you can ask me more questions?
Sure, absolutely.
So it started with Rebecca Hogue, who I met through Rhizo 14. So when Dave Cormier was facilitating Rhizomatic Learning MOOC 2014, I met a lot of people, including Rebecca Hogue, and she was going to this conference, ET4 Online, in 2015. And I was on the organizing committee of that conference. And I was maybe the only person outside the US and Canada who was in the organizing committee. The reason I was on the organizing committee is because I was a really hyperactive virtual participant the year before. There's a big story about Jim Groom and I was testing out Reclaim hosting virtually while he was doing the workshop on site the year before. And I was very active on Twitter. So that next year, I was on the organizing committee. And I really wanted to go. I had a lot of sessions with people and I couldn't make it. And what I wasn't missing out so much on presenting with people, because that's quite easy to do. You can record a video or you can just join in or you can participate in some other way. But I was actually missing out on seeing all of my friends who went to that conference. And I just wanted to talk to them. I wanted to be with them. And part of it is social capital and part of it is just social. Like as an academic, that's part of my social life is my friends are the people that I work with too, you know? And so Rebecca suggested, she's like, I could be your buddy on site. I can just use my phone. You can chat with people. And so that could have happened just on a very personal level. But because I was on the organizing committee, I thought, hey, wait a minute. Well, wouldn't it be nice if I like interviewed people who are on site and other people could watch? And then we're like, oh, other people could join in and ask them questions too. Because ED4 Online had a virtual dimension. But a lot of the times when you have these on-site conferences that have live streaming, and the virtual folks can ask questions, it really depends very heavily on who the person in the room is who's fielding the questions, and they could totally ignore you. It really depends on also the speaker. So when it was Jim Groom doing that and I was a virtual participant, he was really interacting with me a lot because he knew who I was and we had a connection. But if it was someone who didn't know and didn't care, sometimes the virtual folks really felt invisible to the on-site folks. But with virtually connecting, we do a Google Hangout similar to what we're doing right now, Stephen and I. But there would be a bunch of people who are at a conference and then virtual folks, there are like up to 10 of them on Google Hangouts who are joining in and having a chat with the folks who are on site. And there would be a buddy on either side who's a volunteer with Virtually Connecting to make sure that everyone got a chance to speak and hear each other and have a good conversation, basically. So, I mean, we schedule these sessions, we bring the person, we talk to them, and then we invite other virtual folks who want to meet. So if we're having a session, if you're at a conference, if you're like at EDUCAUSE, Stephen, and we know you're going, we'll ask you, hey, can you do a session? Which day works for you? And we'd announce it. Guys, we're going to meet Stephen at this time. If you want to join and talk to him, this is what you do. And so that's why I have a lot of experience with Google Hangouts, because we do this like,
you've been doing it, yeah,
2 or 3 conferences a month.
Yeah.
And that could be like 4 or 5 sessions in a conference. So.
And me, I don't do so much of this, so yeah, I'm still. But it's such a great idea. I love the idea, and you know, I've always tried to record and broadcast my own talks or webcast them if possible. But of course, yeah, the interaction with the remote audience is. I mean, it's even hard to interact with the people in the room. If there's any large number of them, let alone people who aren't in the room. So I like that. So I want to do that. So future conferences. So I'll certainly put my name in as someone who's willing to do that, because I think that would be so cool.
Awesome.
If you want, right? I don't want to impose on you. And if not, then I'll just do it myself, because I'm not above stealing someone else's good idea. I know that Brian Alexander has often done his
future trends.
Yeah, from conferences. I crashed one of those sessions once, and that was fun.
I'm not sure if he started doing it after I think he started doing it after Virtually Connecting.
Yeah, I have no idea of the timeline. it's still a great idea. And it's something that every conference really should have, actually. I mean, because why not? So I'm going to peek into the Twitter notifications are going here. I'm just taking a quick peek. Somebody, Anna Christina Pratas can't connect. That's sad. I'm sorry, Anna. What else have we got here? Neat convergence of two on. Oh, that's a response to something from before. It is interesting how your course, I say your in the plural, and my course in the singular, they do kind of converge, don't they? There's certainly an overlap in them. At least I'm seeing that. How about you?
An overlap between what? I was checking Twitter and I missed that.
That's fine. I was checking Twitter while I was talking, so I forgot. No, it's not true. I forgot what I was saying. I was saying that your course overlaps with this course to a certain degree. For one thing, we're talking about identity.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pop up your course, but why don't you tell me, if you could, a bit about your course and the people you're working with, and etc.
Sure. So I'm working with Catherine Cronin and Mia Zamora. Equity Unbound is an open, equity-focused, open, connected learning experience about intercultural learning. So it's also an intercultural learning experience, but a lot of it is about intercultural learning. And it came out of several things. So I teach a course about digital literacies and intercultural learning, and part of that course, my students have an intercultural synchronous learning experience similar to what we're doing right here with a program called Solia. But the students have always felt like there was something more that they would have liked to do in the course beyond that, something asynchronous or something for a longer period of time, or that was more extended than just the sessions that they went to. And so I've been trying to connect with Mia Zamora's class and Alan Levine's class. And I do love thinking and talking about intercultural learning. And Catherine, Mia, Alan Levine, and I were in Coventry last April. And we were giving a session about microaggression to the folks at Coventry and having a discussion around that. So an intercultural learning topic. And after we came back from that, we're like, hey, maybe we should do something between our courses, and maybe we should organize it properly, because we've been trying to do it before and we do it very last minute because we're very emergent in our teaching. And so when we do that, it doesn't work out in the end. And then somewhere along the way, Mozilla had a call for open leaders, and they made us think about, do we want to make our curriculum open? And so we're being mentored by them, but also, of course, all three of us have a lot of experience with open anyway. And so basically, it's a lot of the stuff that I would have done in my course anyway, or that Mia or Catherine would do in some of their courses. But we're making it open. We're putting all the resources up there. We're organizing into themes, which it wasn't before, which I think has been helpful from the feedback I'm getting from people. It's just helpful that the stuff is there. There are some elements of interactivity in it. So we've had a Twitter scavenger hunt, so a synchronous type of thing. We've had slow chats that Bonnie Stewart actually led. So kind of like what you were saying, when other people start to lead things, is that we tried to say anyone can participate, anyone can contribute ideas, and we'll highlight them or promote them. So Bonnie Stewart added that. Anna Smith suggested some activities, and we've added those. And we're hoping to get more from people who don't know us, but it's always difficult. And so whatever you say, something is open and everyone's welcome, it's usually harder for people who don't know you at all to say, okay, I have something, you know. But the tricky thing about it is it's not a MOOC. It's just the thing we're doing, and we're just making it open, and anyone's welcome to use it, but we're not facilitating it really in that sense, that we're not tracking who's participating on Twitter. And we were kind of shocked that we got like 400 followers on Twitter. We're like, what? But yeah, so it's one of those things that I think is a different thing for different people. And the topics are like, you were bringing them up a few minutes ago. So we talk about introduction and identity. And I was going to mention some of this stuff in my blog post, but I thought it might be too much. And things about how, from a colonial perspectives, and how the colonizer views the colonized, and how that influences how the colonized person views themselves.
Sure.
So I mean, just thinking about, I'd never written a CV in Arabic. I've only ever written a CV in English. I've only ever thought of myself as an academic in English. I've never written an academic paper in Arabic. I can barely read an academic paper in Arabic. I'm fluent in Arabic.
Right.
But not my academic identity is English, And it would mean nothing to anyone if I did really well in publishing in Arabic because that wouldn't advance my career in any way. So thinking about that. So we were very careful to pick speakers whose identity is more marginal in the ways that we see them. So, not a lot of white men anywhere in the course. We've had entire synchronous session where every single person was marginal in some way. It's really interesting. I don't know how we managed that. There were 10 women in a session, and everyone had something, And we talk about that. We talk about empathy and bias, and we talk about equity. And then now we're moving. We did fake news as well, and we're talking about privacy and algorithms right now. I'm very interested in algorithms, but I'm not the best person about privacy. There was something on your site that gave me an idea for something to do in class. I can't remember what it is now, but the class is tomorrow, so I'll look at it again and go back to it. But I do think it's really cool that this is all happening at the same time as yours, because I can then pick some stuff from yours as well.
Good. Well, that's what it's for. And actually, it's interesting you say, it's not really a MOOC because you're not really counting the people who are in it. To me, that's what makes it a MOOC. This idea of registering for a class, being enrolled, and that's, those are artifacts of the institutions. And I'm not really, like in my MOOC, I have no idea how many people are in it. I do know we have around 170 email subscribers. I forgot to create a Twitter account for it. I'm not sure I would have if I had remembered. So I don't know how many Twitter people are following
but
it.
Aras will create really nice graphs for you about the interactions. So.
Yeah, it's true. Those have been really good and helpful. They inform me. But of course, they're a snapshot from a certain perspective as well. I'm expecting and indeed hoping there are people that are taking this course who are not on Twitter at all.
Oh, of course. And people whose interactions are not public.
Yeah, exactly. Which is perfectly fine. I mean, that came up as a discussion earlier this week, I guess, or last week on Twitter, is lurking legitimate participation? I said as I lurked on one of Brian Alexander's conversations at exactly that same time. So I thought, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like, in a face-to-face class, you don't say that the person who's sitting quietly didn't attend. It's just that online you can't see that they're attending, but is counting them the key point, or is it just whether they're benefiting?
Yeah, exactly.
I do think reciprocity is important in the online environment, and I think one of the issues is that some people will not learn that way, and it's okay if they want to learn differently. But it's also, I think a lot of the times when we talk about legitimate peripheral participation or silent learning or whatever we call it, is that sometimes people talk about it as in fully accepting it, and sometimes people talk about it as a step towards eventually. So the term legitimate peripheral participation in community of practice is like, this is a mentoring phase, and then you become an active member. It's not an ongoing phase. But I think for some people that will be always their mode of operation online, and it's fine. And you don't know what to do with counting them, but that's fine too.
I read a really interesting summary of a book. It's going to be in my newsletter called These Truths by an American historian. And she made the comment that as the American Constitution came into existence, that was just around the time when counting people became really important, and facts became less important. And now we're almost at the end of that period where counting is becoming less important, and maybe facts aren't important either, but what is important, and this, my suggestion would be connections and interrelationships.
I think, I don't know if counting is becoming less important. When you're in an institution and they want to count everything, it's sort of, you realize it's silly, but they do want to count a lot of things because they don't want to spend a lot of time understanding things in more depth. So they just want a number that's going to look good or look like it's growing or whatever. but I hear you on the facts. Nobody seems to care about facts anymore. Yeah, but and that connections do matter. It's just that I don't know if everyone realizes it.
Yeah. Do you see the institutional affiliation that you have as essential to your identity?
My institutional, is it essential to my identity? So it's where I graduated from, and I think that's partly why it's part of my identity. Rather than I think I could imagine myself working somewhere else and I wouldn't feel weird. But it's where I graduated from, so that's not going to go away.
Right.
I remember, I'll tell you something a little bit funny. When I first graduated, I worked at Procter and Gamble. That's an American multinational, right?
Yeah.
And there was all kinds of boycotting American products because I think of invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s. And people would say, we're going to boycott American products, so we're going to boycott P&G products, right? We're going to stop buying Pampers and whatever, shampoos or whatever. And I would say, and there were people who worked at P&G who did that. And I was like, wait a minute, but you graduated from the American University in Cairo. Are you going to boycott your university degree? Like, if you're really angry, then you need to boycott, you need to be consistent with that kind of thing. But anyway, it's interesting because I think when you're a student, like your relationship with an institution is very different than when you work there, and your perspective on it is very different. So I would say, my affiliation with my institution is, I could take it or leave it right now. I do think that if I didn't have it, a lot of other things in my life would be different.
Yeah.
But I don't think of it as part of my identity per se.
What about the institution you're working with now? Or you are working
I'm at the same, that's where I work. Yeah, I work at where I graduated. So where I graduated is part of my identity. Because in Egypt, if you're from this institution, that says a lot of other things about you. And it influences who you are as a person in a lot of different ways, because it just makes you a hybrid. So it's not the institution itself as much as I am a hybrid of cultures because of my schooling and my university. And that enables me to be all kinds of other things and so on. And the institutional name just captures that, right? I could explain it all and break it down. And I think sometimes those titles that you put on something are just a way to summarize and sum up some things about yourself that people understand just by seeing that institution name.
So they're abstractions, basically, of a more complex concept.
Yeah. And I just realized that when I was saying it now.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it before.
The trick about abstractions, though, especially abstractions of complex concepts, is that people interpret them differently.
Of course, yeah. Well, and I was thinking, as I said this now, is that when Twitter gives you a certain amount of space to write your identity, it forces you to find those acronyms, or it forces you to abbreviate your identity into a very limited set of things. And you use these abstractions in order to make something more obvious. I think I have, for example, in my Twitter profile, PhD mom, which is a hashtag. And it was a hashtag for women who are moms who are doing their PhD. And it's just my quick way of saying I did my PhD while I was a mom, which for some reason I want to keep asserting, because it was such a big challenge.
Oh, yeah, there it is, PhD mom. Okay, yeah.
And I think maybe at some point in my life, I'm going to stop thinking this is so important, but it still feels important to me.
Well, obviously, it takes up a lot of your time and a lot of your attention. Things that are important to you usually do, but I guess not always. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that.
I do. When you're talking again about these things that people interpret in different ways, I remember during Rhizo 14, this was a huge issue, where I just finished my PhD and they were trying to read Deleuze and Guattari, and I really don't like reading French philosophy translated into English. I don't understand. I think it's meant to not be understood, but it was just really driving me crazy. And someone blogged something like, you can't do Rhizo if you don't read Deleuze and Guattari. I got really pissed off. And I blogged a blog post that created a lot of problems at the time, but I was talking about body of knowledge versus embodied knowledge. And one of the things I was saying, I'm telling you the story because one of the things I say in the blog post is, I have a PhD from a prestigious British university, and I have difficulty reading this. And therefore, I assume that there are other people who have difficulty reading this. And I don't think if you want to be an open, connected experience, that you should force people to read this. And I was saying this as a way to make it more inclusive. But a lot of people looked at that and said, you're showing off that you have a PhD from an elite institution, which was not what I was trying to say at all.
Right.
You know?
So, yeah. It's sometimes those intentions, the best of intentions, are misinterpreted for sure.
But I totally see that now. I mean, I can see why that was a.
I would have interpreted it that way. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah, big PhD person showing off your credentials. Yeah. You shouldn't read this because I say it's a PhD. Yeah, I can see how it would be read that way, even if you don't intend it. But on the other hand, what you say is perfectly true. If you, as a PhD from a prestigious institution, can't understand it, that's a good prima facie case for saying it can't be understood.
No, it means there might be other people who also don't understand it. I don't think it means it can't be understood.
Well, that's kind of what
I mean, you have a background in philosophy, right? You have a background in philosophy, right?
That's
so you
correct.
would probably understand it much more easily than I would.
Not necessarily.
My background is computer science. So for me, coming from a computer science background and doing a PhD in education, that was already a very big transformation from, thinking in algorithms and if then else, and then coming to write in this educational philosophy I can read, but all this other stuff.
So you are a techie then?
Yes, I am. So Jim Groom used to say, you're more tech savvy than you want to let on. But it's just like I have not written a line of code since 2003.
Oh, yeah, that's a long time.
I'll do HTML, but not. Yeah, I'll do HTML.
That would have been what, PHP?
15 years. There wasn't. No, I've never written PHP. I've written C++ and Java, and so I only do like HTML stuff now.
Yeah.
For my blog, or whatever, but not. I don't like it. So if you were to say, if I had to say this part of my identity is like a computer scientist who left the code behind, that's part of my identity, and it's gendered, and it's a big story. And if I just say that, there's a story behind it, but
Yeah. What was that? Does the thinking still linger though? The algorithmic thinking?
A little bit.
A little bit.
A little bit, but also because I'm not that anymore. I kind of understand a lot of what comes out of Silicon Valley, where it sounds like I cannot believe you're thinking of it that way. But actually, no, I remember when people used to think of it that way because I know how I was educated. And I know that humans were not, social science and humans and humanity were not really part of what you're taught. So I was taught how to create, my thesis was a neural network. And I think about the work of people like Safiya Noble and the kinds of things they say about algorithms. Now I understand how they're created. And I also understand why the people who created them think they're doing something that's value neutral.
Right.
And they realize all the, your choices and how they influence and the impact they have on humanity.
But if the data that went into a neural network was genuinely neutral, would the output be neutral?
Is there such a thing as neural data? Like, what would that look like?
It's just a hypothetical. So just assume that it was value neutral.
Is it just about the data? There are a lot of different. The data is obviously the most important thing, but also how you evaluate whether you're being accurate or not is another value question. So it's kind of like when you design a survey. What you choose as the options, the question is like the data, but what you choose as the options is like the output and whether you mix them. So I remember very well, like you could make your neural network easy to deal with if the output was a binary yes, no. But the reality usually isn't that. And so when you do it like that and you teach it only to that level of accuracy, then you're also losing a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I was talking recently about autocorrect as an I'm sure it uses machine learning, right?
Yeah.
And it gets it right a lot of the time, but it gets it wrong so often. It's just ridiculous what it does. So. And I don't think it's getting a bad data set. I mean, that to me, that's a value neutral-ish type of thing. It's learning from my typing, right? It's not value neutral, but it's learning from me. I mean, it has something to start with, but it learns as I use it, right? It's not going to be the same for you as it is for me.
No, it won't be the same, but it'll be also informed by the large body of data from all of the users. There'll be a collaborative element in there.
So it would prefer or focus on a particular kind of English, for example, versus another.
If that was the bulk of the data that it used, probably, yeah. See, I don't know what Google uses as its data, but let's assume everything, right?
Yeah. I think that's safe to assume.
Yeah, but that's an interesting question, right? Is everything, which is Google's data set, is that value neutral? Because essentially, if that's not, nothing can be, as you suggest. But then, if nothing can be, then where's the problem?
But no, we have to stop there because I don't agree with your first thing.
Okay.
First of all, Google doesn't have access to everyone.
Right.
So that's already excluding everyone who's not on Google or who's not online.
Aha.
So that's already not value neutral, right?
Yeah.
There are countries where Google is banned or whatever, and there are countries that are not online at all. So that's a huge amount of people.
Or the half of the world population without any internet access at all.
Exactly. And then the next part of that is there are producers and there are consumers. And for the most part, the production of content on Google is English and comes from the Western world.
Sure.
So that's already not neutral. So I always talk about this, and I'll mention, a lot of people who know me have heard this before, but Wikipedia. We know it's a more democratic space than other spaces, but we also know there's a lot of bias and gendered issues in it and everything. And the thing is, you have Wikipedia pages in English and in a lot of other languages. Arabic is one of the languages that has a lot of Wikipedia articles on it. But if you have the same story about a particular issue that is in conflict, value-wise in history, you have, for example, the 1973 war between Israel and Egypt, and the English version and the Arabic version use the exact same facts, but they come up with different conclusions. Like
I believe that, yeah.
Yeah, the Arabic version says Egypt won, and like that date is a celebration in Egypt. And Israel says Israel eventually won, and that has always been a celebration day in Israel beforehand anyway. So Google probably gets to see much more of the English version than the Arabic version.
Oh, I'm sure.
Aside from Wikipedia. And so Google has, that would not be value neutral. If you had all the knowledge that the world has, not all the knowledge that the world has been written. How would you collect that? Like all those cultures that are only oral, all those cultures, which I understand in Canada, prefer not to share everything about their culture and about their knowledge, except with people of their own. And so I think there's no way to get a neutral data set that represents all people or that equally represents people.
And that leads right into one of my carefully prepared notes. Written on my insurance policy. Which anyhow. And maybe we'll wrap up with this. This is a whole discussion. Because one of the things I was following your stuff, preparing for this, because I actually do prepare for things a little bit. And it was an article about keep your American flag off my hijab. Right? Okay. And of course, you remember that, right? Yeah. And of course, that's certainly a symbol of cultural identity and personal identity and signifies certain sets of values and principles. So, reading that, I could understand that certainly there would be an objection to putting an American flag on it. But it raised the question in my mind, because this comes up quite a lot. It's the whole idea of cultural appropriation. We have the debate, or had the debate in this country about Canadian, English, white Canadian, Western Canadians teaching yoga. And are they doing that, or really are they just teaching relaxation and breathing techniques and not really yoga? There was a big discussion about that. Similarly with the Indigenous or First Nations culture and artifacts as well. And so I would ask, who owns the elements of identity, and can you have an element of identity that you don't actually own? I wonder if you have
That's a
thoughts on
really
that.
good point. That's a really difficult question. I think,
Hmm.
you know, I'm just going to tell you very quickly that a lot of my students did not like that article. And so
Okay.
all of my students are at least partly Egyptian. I have a couple who have a second nationality, but they're all Egyptian. And a few of them wear headscarf, and a lot of the students really hated that article because they disagreed with what she was saying. And so the thing is, what they were also saying is that she does not represent all Muslims in her objection to that. She's an American Muslim, so she's different than us because we're not American Muslims, except for one student in my class. But even there, she does not represent all American Muslims in her objection, because I think a lot of people like that image. And
Yeah, exactly.
And my point of that article was not to, well, I was very happy that my students were happy to object to the article and be angry with it, because my point was not to sort of promote what she was saying as much as show a different perspective on what the first thing people thought when they saw that image, which was positive. But thinking back again, like, so this is making me remember an episode of South Park, and I don't know if you watched South Park.
I have watched some South Park.
Okay.
A good number of episodes.
So my husband loves it, so I watched it. And when I lived in the U.S., it made a lot more sense than it does now, because the context is less obvious to me. But I remember there was a very good episode where someone's dad used the N-word on a game show, and then everyone was all the African Americans were angry at him. And what they did is they went to this guy whose name I don't remember right now, but he's a well-known African American figure, and they apologized to him, and then they thought that would be okay. But it's not, right? Because he does not speak for all African Americans, and so apologizing to him is meaningless. And so I guess no one person, of course, or nobody owns not just their own identity. I mean, not even your own, right? Like one of the tricky things with something like a headscarf is that people, if you're the only headscarf person in a community, then you automatically are tokenized and represent that. And I think that's never the case for identities that are like that. I think for something that is more of an affinity type of identity, like virtually connecting, I think if you are doing something in the name of virtually connecting, then you should be representing virtually connecting and try to sort of represent those values that we have of virtually connecting, like inclusion and things like that. And when you don't do it, then it is problematic, and you do have someone to go back and talk to, because it's still a small community. It's not like connectivism, which is now no longer in your hands, you know.
No, it's totally not in my hands.
But virtually connecting an organization is very small. Like there are about maybe 50 really active people, maybe fewer are really, really active. And so in that sense, there is still that thing. But yeah, I don't think anyone really owns an identity or a dimension of identity. It's kind of like saying, this is what it means to be a good mom, or this is what it means to be a bad mom. There isn't that.
Yeah.
Or this is what it means to be a good citizen or a patriot or whatever. Like people do it all the time. They make those judgments, but nobody is an authority who has the right to do that, really. I guess except the governments that, don't give you citizenship or whatever, but you know what I mean.
I totally know what you mean. And, I'm inclined to agree with your perspective here, but I think a lot of people would not. And, I mean, in almost every society that I've been to, there's some sense of what it means to be a good whatever. And the same is true with religion. The same is true with cyclists or dart players. A dart player just doesn't do that, right? You don't make noise while someone else is throwing. You wouldn't do that. But who decides? And it's an interesting question, because nobody decides.
But it becomes a thing, and then it's very difficult to challenge it, even if people start to realize there's something wrong with it. Yeah. It's like a little bit what you were saying earlier about what's a course. When you say this is a MOOC, like identity is not just for individuals, right? A lot of things have identities or labels.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
And so who puts that label on something, and who decides? I always joke about the whole thing about Pluto not being a planet anymore. And I say, the construction of planet is a human constructed thing. They can change that definition anytime and add or remove or exclude whatever they want anytime. It's not a fact of life, So.
Pluto will always be a planet in my heart. because Pluto is the planet with a heart.
It's not a value neutral decision, apparently.
Yeah, no, it was a planet when I was a kid. It'll be a planet when I'm old. Yeah. One last question.
Sure.
Is identity the sum of the parts or greater than the sum of the parts?
Probably greater. Because I think each one on its own is very different than the combination. And not necessarily greater than the sum. I think different from the sum.
Exactly.
Qualitatively different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. Maha, no, let's get this right.
Good. You're good. You're doing okay. Don't drive yourself crazy.
I like to do things right. I'm a stickler that way. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Certainly
This was so much fun. I think we were making up for lost time, right? We talked about everything.
We did, yeah, because and for those who are still watching, we're still at 14 viewers. Not bad. Yeah.
I hope they enjoyed that.
That's why it's my 6 and your 8. Yeah, we also said, that we might not actually get along, and we would feel free to let it drift off.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This will be posted almost right away on the e-learning 3.0. As you know, this is what Google does. And
you still gotta love and hate Google at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, this is so much better than Skype.
Yeah.
But yeah, now Google does a lot of good things. I mean, and sometimes they do bad things. I guess they're like a person in that way, except they are not a person.
They're too powerful.
They're
more than the sum of. They're more than the sum of the people.
They're more than the sum of the people. Yeah, that's true.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. And to everybody on e-learning 3.0, thank you for joining us. So glad we had you here. Sorry for not reading your tweets or your comments, and the comment thing was probably broken again. But we'll be reading them after. I can guarantee it. Talk to you all later. I'm Stephen Downs.